say, even though it was very difficult going through it, that they're better off for it because they've really made improvements to their systems. They never really objectively looked at their documentation and saw the weaknesses until they had to step back and look at it like a third-party reviewer would. And so I guess I would encourage you, while you advocate for your organization, to also step back and look at how can we improve going forward, because as we say on that slide, really winning is not having to deal with claim denials again in the future, which, again, there's no promises there, but hopefully you can get claims paid and then don't have all of the headaches that go along with if you get claims denied. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is just staying ahead of the trends. We're going to talk about some of the trends and some changes in the denial reasons that we've been seeing and some things that we think could be new denial reasons. Some of these are just an evolution of new issues, but we're also getting new contractors, and they bring their own interpretation and sometimes new interpretation. And so a lot of these contractors don't have a lot of background in hospice. And the example we have on the slide, it says these are real denial reasons from NEHIC that says they're denying the claim because care needs were met by the facility staff or there was no acute event that led to the hospice admission. As we know, neither of those are requirements for hospice eligibility, but you can see that that's the mindset and that's what they're zoning in on. Now, knowing that, does it necessarily change the game for you? I mean, you're still going to have to put on your case, but know that you might have some troubling interpretations. And like I said earlier, just because an intermediary denies something does not mean that it shouldn't be paid. And you really need to use the tools in this toolkit to help you effectively advocate. Now, Mary, I know you wanted to talk about drafting effective cover letters.
Sure. I'm actually going to take a bit of a more in-depth look at a couple of issues that we do get a lot of questions on, and those are drafting the cover letter and preparing for the ALJ hearing. And we get a lot of questions, I think, because there is so much flexibility here, and people are kind of struggling to say, well, how do we do this? We've never done this before. And so I think the point on our first slide here is finding a style that works for you. We've drafted the templates in Section 7 of the toolkit because a lot of people do come to us and say, I don't know where to start. And some people find those really helpful. But don't feel bound by those. That's one way of doing it. But if you find that your medical director is great at putting together a little bullet point list of all the things that support eligibility, that can be a really effective way to present all the material. The goal here of the cover letter is you want to make the reviewer's job as easy as possible to find in your favor. And so I think it helps to sort of step in their shoes and say, what would this look like if I were a reviewer and I got a stack of documentation and a general statement that this means that this person was eligible for hospice care. Well, I have to go through and do all of that work myself and find, well, here's this, note from the nurse on this date, and maybe this is significant, or maybe this shows a change. But how much easier would it be if I wrote a little summary at the front end and said, here are the things that are really important for you to see. Here's the course of this person's illness over time so that you can see where those changes are and what our medical director and interdisciplinary team were thinking when we thought, yep, this person is still eligible for hospice care or for the level of care, whether it be, general inpatient care or continuous care, if that's what's at issue. There's not a requirement to include a cover letter. It is something that we do think is helpful. If you get through the process and you think, this just isn't working for me, it's not within my skill set, you can consider whether it's something that you want to go without and just, maybe you're better presenting orally at the ALJ hearing, and that's what you're going to rely on. So don't feel bound by any of this, but we do think it's helpful and encourage people to really give it a try. And so moving on to the next slide about reviewing documentation. And the point here is, first of all, this is going to help you write a good cover letter, but it's going to help you throughout the process. You are going to, if you do need to go to ALJ, you're going to need to know that record in and out. And this, by really looking at it from an outsider's perspective and saying, what do I want this reviewer to see? What are the parts that I want to make sure they don't miss because they're key to telling the story of why this person was eligible or needed this level of care. And that's really what we're looking at when we're looking through the documentation. The next slide is about understanding the issue. Now, clearly it's going to make a big difference about whether the denial is for a technical reason or a clinical reason about how we present the case. If it is a technical denial, I will note they're not bound by whatever initial reason they started off with. So let's say that initially they denied the claim because they thought the certification was untimely. And then I file my redetermination request and say, no, actually it was timely, and they agree with me. Well, they're not bound to say, you win, we were wrong the first time. They can go and then look at other issues, and if they, for example, determine that they don't think the documentation supports eligibility, it's well within their prerogative to do that. So we do encourage, if there is a technical denial, to also address clinical issues in your appeal as well. Moving on to the next slide is just about understanding your audience. And again, it's all about stepping into the shoes of the person who's going to look at this. If it's the intermediary, you know, that all they're doing is a record review. And so pointing out, you know, the documentation that they'll find helpful. And at the intermediary level and at the QIC, the Qualified Independent Contractor for Reconsideration, those are clinicians, generally nurses, and so they will have some familiarity when you use clinical terms. At the intermediary level, they're going to be tuned into the LCD that's relevant to their jurisdiction. At the QIC level, we've seen some crazy things come out of them. They seem to have a general sense of what eligibility should look like, and they don't, in some cases, seem to focus on the particular criteria of the LCD as they ought to. And then once you get to the ALJ, know that they're, you know, poor lawyers like us who are hopelessly lost, or maybe not hopelessly, but that don't have, you know, your clinical skills and background, and that maybe need a bit more explanation of some terms that you might think are basic and that everyone would know, but really we don't. So, and then moving on to preparing for the ALJ hearing, and I think our clients understandably are a little nervous when they're doing their first ALJ hearing. It sounds like some big formidable process where, you know, there's a guy in a robe and there's going to be objections and all that. It's really not. It is, I think most people find, a really helpful, opportunity for them to present their case to, in most cases, a really objective, impartial reviewer. And you can do it in a sort of question and answer mode where you know you can talk to the person and they can talk back, and then they can explain to you what are the issues that they're getting hung up on, what are they confused about. And so I think that's very helpful. The kind of downside of that is that there's no one way that we can tell you an ALJ hearing will always go. They depend so much on the particular style of the judge that we can't say, yes, they're always going to focus on this issue or they're always going to ask this question. It really is something where you need to be prepared to just sort of, you know your case. That's what you can control. You know what it is that you want to convey to the judge to let him or her know why you think the claim should be paid. And there might be all sorts of twists and turns that hearing takes along the way. And you can't really control those twists and turns, but you can control your level of preparation and your ability to adjust as needed depending on what the ALJ's style goes. You know, we have on this slide that we've had reports of ALJ hearings lasting anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 hours plus. I can say the typical experience, I think, is usually between a half hour and an hour if you're just dealing with one claim. But those outliers are just, you know, a judge comes in and says, oh, I see you have all this. Do you have anything, you know, gives a clear indication that they want to rule favorably, and that's it. So if you get one of those, congratulations. You might also get a judge who comes in there and wants to look at every single piece of documentation and have you give a thorough explanation of why you think that documentation is significant and supports your argument that the claim should be paid. That's the one you want to prepare for. You might not get that judge. You might get the 5-minute judge, but you certainly can't count on that. And, you know, understanding the things that you can't control of, you know, the ALJ's temperament, but you can control that the ALJ will get very impatient very quickly if you show that you have not given adequate preparation or thought about what you want to say.